Good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. At 9:15 this morning, 50 years to the moment, silence fell over Aberfan as the village remembered the disaster that claimed the lives of 116 children and 28 adults. They died when a mountain of coal mining waste collapsed and engulfed the primary school and houses. Survivors and relatives of those who died were at the ceremony this morning, and more events will be held throughout the day. Our correspondent, Bethan Rees-Roberts, is in Aberfan. Bethan.
Yes, we're just outside the Garden of Remembrance here in Aberfan, Jane, where just a few minutes ago the Prince of Wales arrived to pay his respects. He is now being taken around the garden, meeting local people, dignitaries, politicians. The Secretary of State for Wales is here, the First Minister of Wales is here. He will then plant a tree in this garden and will be told about the poignant layout of this garden, which is designed to reflect the classrooms of that school, which was engulfed in slurry on that tragic day 50 years ago. A day when school children gathered on this very site for the last day of school before the half-term holidays. But it was a day that was to scar this community forever. Thomas Morgan reports.
50 years to the day at 9:15 a.m, a Welsh community was torn apart. And at 9:15 this morning, a community and a nation remembers one of the worst disasters in Welsh and British modern times. In 1966, the coal industry was still booming in South Wales. The local colliery had been dumping waste onto Mynydd Merthyr above the village of Aberfan for some time. But days of heavy rain in mid-October turned that waste into slurry. And on the morning of the 21st, the subsidence caused that slurry to come crashing down like an avalanche into the village.
When the coal tip at Aberfan near Merthyr Tydfil slid forward, engulfing an infant school and a row of houses.
Bearing the brunt of the damage was Pantglas Junior School. Sitting next to the window as a child when disaster struck was David Davis.
My body was brought out and initially placed with those that had died and been covered in a blanket until someone said that they thought they saw my foot move. So I was re-examined, and evidently a sign of life still there.
116 children died, along with 28 adults. Had the slurry hit hours later, the school would have been empty. It was the last day of term. Hundreds came to join the rescue efforts, many from collieries across South Wales. One of the first on the scene was policewoman Yvonne Price, who suffered with PTSD due to the tragedy.
When we were passing the dead children through, one man just looked down and just turned and looked at me and he said, "That was my child." Oh. It was one of the worst things, and he just carried on working.
In the immediate aftermath, locals demanded to know why this had happened. They had raised repeated concerns about the tipping. Was it a terrible accident or a preventable man-made catastrophe? A tribunal was set up to inquire why and how this disaster had happened. Lasting 76 days, it was the longest of its kind at the time, with over 100 people interviewed and 300 exhibits examined. Its findings were that this tragedy was in fact avoidable, with the blame resting entirely on the National Coal Board. To this day, that event has had a resounding impact on this community.
The tragedy has shaped the community indelibly and shaped the lives of everybody affected by it, everybody closely affected by it, the children and their parents, and even people a good deal further away from it.
Gas struck above ground.
Destruction and devastation which should have been avoided. But 50 years on, this current generation remembers the generation that was lost. And a community that was shattered will never forget. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Aberfan.
And the Prince is continuing his visit of the Garden of Remembrance right here next to us, meeting those dignitaries before he moves on down the road into the community centre, where he will meet some of the survivors of that day and also unveil a plaque in memory of those events. Now, this is a community which is not only dealing with that tragedy half a century ago, but then went on to fight for justice. A community which came together, and a community which will never, ever forget those events of 50 years ago. Jane.
Bethan, thank you. Bethan Rees-Roberts there in Aberfan.